Welcome to Wine Soundtrack Australia. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world.
In 30 ounces, discover their stories, personalities and passions.
Hello friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. My name is Priscilla Hennicum and I'm here with Darren Rathbone from Yering Station. So he's the winery maker and CEO. How are you today?
Very well, Priscilla. Great to meet you. Thanks.
So Yering Station is in the beautiful Yarra Valley. Why did you decide to make your wines here, Darren?
We first purchased the property at Yering Station in 1996. It was the real reason for there is partly because we love drinking the wines from the Yarra Valley, but also its convenience to Melbourne. At that time, it was my father and my uncle that purchased the property, and they, both living in downtown Melbourne, wanted to have the business that we'd developed close to where we live. So it's a convenience, but also a love for the wines that come from here.
But you have the Yering Station here in Yarra Valley, but it's not the only winery you guys have in Australia, yeah?
Yeah, so we established Yering Station and were very pleased with the position that Yering Station had reached in the early 2000s. I'd gone off and studied overseas, and when I came back, I sat down with Dad and we talked about how we could expand the business, and the idea that we came up with was, rather than growing Yering Station to be beyond what we thought it was capable of, to develop a portfolio of complementary brands. We wanted them to be brands that would sit together on a wine list, brands that we would want to drink ourselves, certainly focus on the quality end of the market. So in the end of 2002, we purchased Mount Langi in the Grampians in Western Victoria, and in 2005 we purchased Xanadu in Margaret River.
Beautiful wineries as well, like completely different regions as well, yeah? So do you want to tell like what's the main difference and what do you find, why you choose these specific regions for actually make your wines?
So the Yarra Valley is a fantastic cool climate region that does particularly Pinot Noir and Chardonnay really, really well, and has a interesting style of spicy Shiraz that we really enjoy, and also actually makes some really elegant, beautiful Cabernets. So they were the four varieties that we were working with. When we looked to what would complement Yering Station, we wanted to be making wines that were different to what the Yarra Valley could make, but were still exciting and engaging. Mount Langi is very famous for making very spicy Shiraz. It's still in a cool climate style and still very elegant, but it tastes quite different. It's got much more blueberry fruit in it, and the structure of the wines is quite different. So Mount Langi was a really good fit from a Shiraz point of view. And then as a Cabernet lover myself, and always loving drinking the wines from Margaret River, and particularly Cabernet from Margaret River, we got attracted into looking at Margaret River as a region. The Chardonnay from Margaret River is wonderful, but it's very different from the Chardonnay from the Yarra Valley. So again, very good complements. And you end up with three strong brands, all producing excellent quality of wine that tell different stories.
Yeah, definitely tell different stories. Three fantastic wine regions in Australia. So what's it about it, like, do you sell your wines overseas, right? So where about it, like overseas, we actually you can find in like your three brands?
We're trying to be everywhere, is the short answer. So Australia is still our biggest market, and we do a lot direct to consumer in Australia, and we're well distributed across Australia. We're working hard to develop our business in North America. In North America, both the USA and Canada have been important markets for us. We've been quite strong in the UK for a long time, and we've worked quite hard to hold a position there. But we also work in many markets across Northern Europe, the Scandinavian countries, and Denmark's quite strong, Holland's relatively strong. We've got small presences in some of the other European countries. And then we're also strong throughout Asia. So Southeast Asia's good for us. Japan, Korea have been important markets. China has been an important market in the past, and we're hoping it'll be an important market again for us in the near future.
Yeah, it probably has come back, so that's the news about it.
The indication's really positive. So certainly with our Prime Minister visiting China recently, and the discussions are all pointing in the right direction. So my hope and expectation is that by sometime, maybe April next year, the tariffs will be lifted and we'll be able to re-engage with the Chinese customers that we'd spent a long time developing good relationships with in the past.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit like about you, Darren. Like, how did you start in the wine industry?
Well, but my dad was always a passionate wine consumer. He loved drinking wine, and it was always something that was around the family table and always part of a good meal. I was good at science at high school and always had a strength in science, so I went on to study chemical engineering at university without any idea of where I was going to end up, but it was seemed like a good, interesting degree to appeal to myself. And then it was just as I was graduating chemical engineering that Dad and his brother Graham purchased a small property in the Yarra Valley. That was 1995, and we purchased a property that we still own called Laura Barnes.
Oh, wow.
And I, having just graduated and looking for engineering jobs, started working planting that vineyard, because it had been a tomato farm before we owned it. So my first job in the wine industry was planting vines at our Laura Barnes vineyard, which was sort of an interesting introduction, and it sort of opened my eyes to the idea that the wine industry could be an interesting career. So Dad and I sat down together in late 1995 and sort of said, well, this is a 30-acre property, is really too big to be a hobby, but it's too small to be a business. What do we want to do? And Yering Station was on the market at that time, and so we made the decision that we did want to start a serious family business and build something that would be for generations to come. And that was when I sort of said, yeah, I'm really excited about getting into the wine industry, and we were able to purchase Yering Station at the start of '96, and that's when we started designing the building and the restaurant and the winery that we're in now. And I worked through that it took us 3 years to build this building. So yeah, that was sort of my introduction to the wine industry.
But did you drink wine when young with your parents? Was the age underage?
Well, it's not very. It's a little bit frowned upon now. I'm certainly a big supporter of the Drinkwise campaigns and all these moderate positions that are across the wine industry at the moment. But yes, as a teenager, I was always, when I was young, I was allowed to have a taste of Dad's glass, and by the time I was in my mid-teens, I'd get a glass of wine out of the bottle that Mum and Dad were sharing together, so there was always, the flavour and the taste experience was the important part of it. And yeah, it was always introduced to me as a young child.
Yeah. So what's do you believe there is a perfect variety for Australia? Do you think Shiraz is the perfect variety, or you're thinking things is changing at the moment? What Darren thinking about it?
For me, there's no perfect variety for Australia. Australia is a really diverse country with lots of different microclimates and different terroirs, if I can steal the French word. Yeah. And trying to match the variety to the location, to the climate is really important. So Shiraz does really well in lots of different places. Pinot Noir is really exciting in the Yarra Valley, and I think what we're doing here, and in other cool climate parts of Australia, but what we're doing here with Pinot Noir is really exciting. Cabernet in Margaret River is also an amazing drink. So putting the right variety to the right region to the right place, and that sense of place to me is a really important integral part of the wines we're trying to create.
Yeah, so that's how we can focus on quality and increasing more the potential for each region.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what do you talk about social networks and social life, like social medias and things like that? What Darren believe in that? Darren like social media? Darren don't like it?
I find that for myself, social media is a great way to connect and stay in contact with people. There's plenty of negative sides to it that people can see as well, but certainly for me it's a way to let my friends know what I'm doing, have a conversation about wine with people who are really interested, tell people about our new products. It's a really, at some levels, quite an engaging way to connect to people about things that we're interested in. So yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, and they're sort of the only three I really use, but yeah, it's a good way to connect to people.
No TikTok for Darren?
No, I haven't done TikTok. It's and I never really got into Twitter either. But yeah,
I am in the same spot. I have Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, but I don't have TikTok. I don't have Twitter either. So I don't know why. How much is it? Like, do you have a cellar? Yeah, in your home?
Yeah, I do have a cellar. I really enjoy drinking wines that are sort of 10 to 15 years old, and because I think depends on the wine, of course, but particularly with Cabernet and Shiraz and great wines improve with age, and when they get to that sort of 10, 15-year-old gap, they seem to be sort of, for me, like I said, it depends. Some wines are better drunk young. You don't want 15-year-old rosé, but. And some wines look fantastic when they're 30 or 40 years old, but 10 years is generally a pretty good window for my palate. And so to do that, I need to have a reasonable cellar, because I can't afford to buy 10-year-old wine, so I've got to buy young wine and keep it.
Do you know how the most expensive bottle you have there?
Unfortunately, it'd probably be a French wine. I'd love to say it would be an Australian wine, but I know that I've got a 1982 bottle of Petrus hidden in the back of, which is...
Which vintage, sorry?
1982, so that was a really strong year. I've got no idea how much that would be worth right now, but I'm guessing that'd probably be... The thing for me, though, it's not about how much it's worth, it's about the experience of consuming it, right? Okay. Because I could take that bottle and go and sell it on an auction or something and get the money for it, or I could have the experience of tasting what a 40 or 50-year-old Petrus actually tastes like. Not many people in the world get that experience. No. So for me, the experience is worth more than the money. It's just you can't afford that experience very often with it.
No at all. Petrus is the classic wine. Darren, tell me, if imagine a VIP person or famous in the world, get a photo, some paparazzis take some pictures from them, and then they have actually a bottle of Yering Station Pinot Noir on the table, but they're gonna be connect with that brand, with that VIP person. So that person, who you would like to see, with a bottle of Yering Station, publish it everywhere?
Ooh, that's a curious question. I don't get sucked into the celebrity thing so much myself. As far as having an effect on our brand and a positive positioning on our brand, the person I think that could have the most influence would be Xi Jinping in China, right? Because the Chinese actually respond really strongly to what their president does. Yeah. And so that would certainly be a big upswing in our presence in China. Whereas if you're talking about the American market, for example, you're going to get a much better position if it's a movie star or a rock star or someone in that. So, to have, I don't know, if Brad Pitt was drinking a bottle of Yering Station and was photographed, it would be, have a much bigger influence in the North American market. Yeah. And so That's just depends where you're trying to hit.
Yeah, I guess a couple people would be nice from America, from China, from different countries.
Absolutely.
Each vintage is different, right? Do you believe
Absolutely.
that? And then tell us about why it's so different each vintage here in Yarra Valley.
The vintage variation is part of what makes wine so engaging and interesting for me. Every year the weather's a little bit different. Every year you've got a little bit drier and hotter or cooler or wetter, and that has a influence on the wine that, again, it comes back to telling the story of that wine, right? So, the 2021 vintage, which is our current reserve release at the moment, was just such a perfect vintage in so many ways. It was a long, mild, moderate vintage. There weren't any extremes, and it just made really, really fine, elegant wines that I'm really excited to drink. 2020 was a bit hotter. We had some extreme heat at the start of that season, and there were bushfires in other parts of Australia at that time, and it was a much more stressful vintage. And we're also, of course, 2020 was the start of COVID, so suddenly we were struggling to find people to come and work in our vineyards and our wineries. So things, like the pandemic, political things, also have an effect on the outcome of the wines. So every vintage tells a story, and all the wines are reflective of the year they're made in. I think that's important.
And it's important as well to share the challenges for the customers as well, because I guess not everything is perfect.
No, of course not everything's perfect, and part of the interesting challenge in making wine is to put the energy and effort and work into overcoming those challenges. Right?
Yeah, so they actually to be able to deal with all these challenges every year is always a new story to tell. Tell me about when you very little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, as I said before, I'd always had an interest in science, right? I was a Lego kid. I used to love building things with Lego, right? So the idea of that kind of is what led me into engineering, I think, was to sort of say, hey, I like the idea of designing and constructing and building stuff. I wouldn't have said as a 10-year-old, I want to be an engineer. I wouldn't have understood what that meant. But the idea of wanting to build things was always appealing to me.
Yeah. And then what is it actually like for building things? How did you end up with that strong position to start make wine? It was just by planting the vines. That's how and growing up, like making wines in yourself, because you're making wines, yeah.
I think making wine is a really interesting application of understanding the science behind it. There's a lot of obviously plant biology and growing grapes. There's a lot of microbiology in turning grapes into wine. There's a lot of chemistry involved. There's also a creative process, of course. You're not starting with a blank canvas. You're trying to create the best grapes you possibly can, and for us we want the flavours from those grapes to transfer into the bottle. So what's the best process this year to capture those flavours so that it has the best, most pleasant experience for the consumer that we can possibly create. So there's this application of science in a creative process that to me is a really engaging way to apply that skill that I've got.
And I guess it's a little bit different as well, because you can create something new every year, so you don't need to follow like a recipe or anything.
No, there's a number of different techniques and tools, and some years we'll use these techniques and other years we'll use these techniques, and being able to shift and change depending on what the season's done is part of what makes it fun and interesting.
And part of Australia as well, because we can do that, innovating and bringing different things, technology to the industry.
Absolutely. It's it's great to have the flexibility to work within. Well, obviously there's still legal requirements we've got to follow and all the rest of it, right? But we're not bound to the tradition that a lot of the European producers are bound to. So in that sense, if we think a different variety is going to work, we can go and plant that variety and experiment with it. If we think a different technique's going to work in the winery, so long as it's not outside the legal additives and all those kind of rules that we've got to follow, then we're free to experiment.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's what I see. Australia, it's pretty good, like to innovate the industry quite a bit, in like heavily and building a lot of technology and be upfront as well. Question for you. Let's come back to Darren. Darren, if you have a white wine or a red wine, do you really follow that things like red wine need to be with meat and white wines need to be with fish? Like, how do you follow that path? Like, how do you recommend the wines to be drinking for your consumers?
I think food and wine matching is another one of the great pleasures within the wine industry. So the rules are useful to give you a guide if you're not very experienced or you're not sure, but it's always really fun to explore new combinations and find different flavours. So particularly with the structure of the wine, to me, is a big part of what gives you the interaction with the food. So whether a wine's sweet or dry or tannic or big or fine, or and trying to match that with whether it's with proteins or with other sweet food or other acidic food, those combinations can play in all kinds of directions. So it's quite interesting to find a white wine that'll match with a meat dish, or a red wine that'll match with a fish dish, but there's so much more complexity to food, of course. There's also that complexity to wine.
And have you paired the white wine with meat or red wine with fish?
Oh, I certainly have. Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly get some, really elegant, fine Pinot Noir and match it with a interesting salmon dish, or there's all kinds of ways you can kind of cross those boundaries in. And I also find looking at trying to match wine with food from other cultures is really interesting, right? So, when we're selling wine in China, we talked about China a bit already, trying to find wine dishes that work with, wine combinations that work with Chinese dishes is really interesting. Or when we're in, I was in Japan recently doing some promotional work in Japan, and when you're trying to find our wines matched with Japanese food is a really fun way to play as well, right? If we ever do get going in Brazil, it'd be really fun to play with Brazilian food and Australian wine. Right?
It'd be amazing. It'd be so delicious. How many glasses or bottles of wine are needed to get Darren drunk? How many glasses of Petrus?
If it's a wine like Petrus, I think I could just keep going all night. Right? It's not about quantity; it's about quality, and it's not about getting drunk. It's about the pleasure and enjoyment, and it's might be sharing it with friends. It might be experiencing the flavours and the combinations with food. It might be just looking at a wine on its own. The pleasure for me comes in the experience of the wine and the effect that wine has on the conversation around the table and the engagement with it. So, it's not about getting drunk. It's about it's about pleasure.
Yeah,
right?
about pleasure. Yeah, and imagine if you have a Petrus on the table.
Absolutely, that'd be very pleasurable.
And so, then tell me like the nicest film dedicated to wine you love it and recommend to the listeners to actually watch.
I really enjoyed it. It's a series rather than a film, but the Drop of, was it called Drop of God or Drop of the Gods? The French woman and the Japanese guy that were competing to inherit the cellar of this wine writer. It was a really interesting story and engaging characters, and it was a bit fanciful about how detailed they could arrive at a wine through tasting, right?
Yeah.
That was beyond anyone's real ability, but the story was good. I just really enjoyed that series.
Yeah. And then something like you connected with the wine. So when you're not working, Darren, how do you spend your free time?
I'm a martial artist. I really enjoy martial arts. So I've been doing Wing Chun Kung Fu for about 12 years now.
Oh, wow. So I have to be careful. If I do some question here, I can.
It's very much an art more than a martial thing, right? It's a good physical and mental focus, and I find it really engaging. I love snowboarding when I get the chance to get up in the mountains and on a snowboard. That's the other sport that I really enjoy. Beyond that, it's food and wine with friends and family. Right?
Yeah. I guess everyone who actually work in the industry love it to do that, and even don't work in the industry, they still love to do that.
Oh, when you're in the wine industry, there's a fine line between work and not work, right? And when you love what you do, then you do what you love. So
yeah, it's so true. Complete the sentence, Darren. A table without wine is like?
It's like a desk. I don't know.
Boring?
It's boring. It's.
What sort of wine do you think you're going to be drunk in the future? Which the styles, and what do you believe is the future for the wine industry in Australia?
Well, if I knew that, I'd be a millionaire, right? It's predicting the future is very difficult. My thoughts are that there's evolving flavours, there's evolving trends within the wine industry, but the thing that wine does really well, and it doesn't really matter which variety you're making out of, but if you've got a balanced palate, a good texture to the wine, and a good combination of flavours that work with food, with a meal, that's timeless for me. That's what people talked about hundreds of years ago. That's what people will continue to talk about into the future. So how you produce a wine that suits the palate and the flavour and the taste of the current generation or the next generation.
Exactly, that's a very good question. So how we can actually engage with the new generation now with the wine?
So I think it's still a question of getting that level of passion for flavour and passion for food. I mean, I enjoy drinking beer, I enjoy drinking all kinds of other things, but for me, wine just has that extra depth of engagement and extra pleasure to it that if you can get that conversation going with people of any generation, and that enjoyment of exploring different flavours and different nuances, that's how you get the next generation coming through. And I'm not that concerned if, when I was different, I started drinking wine when I was young with my family and always had a interest in it, but you find with most people they don't start to explore those nuances and those levels of detail in their food or their drink or in this case, of course, their wine, until they get a little bit older and they start to look for those kind of things in a little bit more depth. So I think it's just about having that conversation and engaging with people who are interested, and then those people that are interested will go and tell their friends, and those people will go and tell their friends, and it'll just expand in that kind of a natural way.
The last 20 years plus you have been in the industry, do you feel like people really drink more light style, like Pinot Noir, for example, like your Pinot Noir increasing much more in sales than the other varieties?
There's certainly been a trend towards more elegance. I think, and that's, if you look at the Australian market in particular, yes, there's been a shift towards Pinot Noir and a shift towards more delicate, more elegant styles of wine. I think that's also part of the diversity of food that is now available in Australia. If I think back to the style, the international styles of food, when I was growing up in the 80s, there was Chinese food, but we didn't have the subtleties of the differences between Cantonese food and Szechuan food and Shanghai food. There was just Chinese food, right? Yeah. And so we've kind of developed a broader understanding of international food, and in Australia now we've got essentially every cuisine in the world is here, right? And so people have become more aware of and engaged with what they're eating, and at the same time they get more aware of and engaged with what they're drinking. Yeah. And I think there's still a very clear place in my mind for big, bold, dense Shiraz, absolutely. And when you're having a barbecue and you're having a steak, and it's kind of a really natural fit, right? Yeah. But the diversity of what we eat now needs to be matched with the diversity of what we drink now, and so much more of what we want to eat and drink is lighter and fresher and got, a lot more access to fresher foods, so access to fresher wines becomes important.
Yeah, so you still believe it's going to be a little bit both, but the freshness is probably more towards the trendy now.
I think the diversity is important, and I expect the diversity to continue to increase, right? Yeah. Which means that those, let me call them old-fashioned wines, will get less and less because people are starting to look to other places. That doesn't mean they disappear altogether. That just means the whole market rebalances.
Yeah, and that's another challenge the winemakers and people working in the wine industry need to deal with, like the all new trends, the all things that start to come. So what's the winemaking area in the world you'd like to explore? Have you been in Europe in many places, in Bordeaux, Burgundy? So do you have any places in the world you would like to explore? Have you been to Argentina?
I have been to Argentina. I've had the pleasure, the enjoyment, the luck of being able to travel to lots of places already and really enjoyed it. So I've worked vintages in Champagne, Burgundy, Bordeaux, and the Napa Valley. I did my study in California at UC Davis for wine, so that was a great experience to get exposure to not just California but American wines in general, which was really interesting. I went to Argentina for my honeymoon, where we said that we wouldn't go to a wine region, but then somehow we ended up in Mendoza anyway. So that was a fabulous experience, and I do really enjoy the wines of Argentina. And again, a really different place to be that high up in the mountains and to understand the way that they've got plenty of water because of all the snow melt, but they don't get very much rain, and they've got all this sunshine and this really high altitude. It's a really interesting combination. There
is any places you want to go?
There's lots of places I want to go, actually.
Like a wine region?
Yeah, no, I'd love to see some of the Eastern European wine regions, because there's wines there that I've never heard of and never understood, and until you get to those kind of places, I'll never get to understand them. I'd like to get back to South Africa. I've been to South Africa once, but I'd be really interested to see more South African wine, and we don't get very much South African wine in Australia, so that's the kind of thing that I only get to drink when I'm travelling overseas. Yeah. So
Yeah, sadly, it's not much around in Australia at all. It's very hard. I was studying my Western diploma. It was very hard to get wines from South Africa. It was very limited.
Yeah, well, I think it's just hard for the South Africans who've got better markets than Australia to compete in, and they don't focus on us because we drink all our own wine. Right? I don't think we export very much to South Africa either. So
No. But Australia is pretty good. Like working in retail in Australia, I see like lots of people really like to buy Australian wines as well. I guess like 85% of these bigger retailers is pretty much Australian wines. Darren, let's go to a game. You ready for play a game with us today?
I can play a game. Yeah, well, explain the game.
So we're going to talking to you like famous people in the world. Could be a singer, could be a politician, TV celebrities, and then you just gonna tell us which grape variety, if you prefer, or wine is actually matching very well with that celebrity, like with that famous person. I wanted to start with Madonna. So, do you think Madonna would like a Yarra Bank?
Yeah, Madonna probably would like Yarra Bank, I think. I mean, Madonna, a very intelligent and well-accomplished woman, certainly would be engaged in a celebratory drink like sparkling wine, like Yarra Bank, and something that's certainly in that very fine, finessed end of sparkling wine, which is what we're trying to do with Yarra Bank. So I think that could be a good combination.
And you actually started that with a French winemaking, like a French winery in Champagne, yeah?
Yeah, so that was started as a joint venture between Yering Station and Champagne de Vaux. And we had a great partnership that lasted for over 20 years, that after 20 years we bought them out and took over the production ourselves from that time. But it was a spectacular partnership together, and we've made some really interesting wines that have been Australian grapes, Australian and Yarra Valley grapes and Yarra Valley style of wine, but with French techniques to give us something that's crossing over those two cultures.
Yeah, that's great. So we found a wine for Madonna and Michael Jackson. Do you think Michael Jackson like any of the Yering Station? Or maybe some wines from Cabernet Sauvignon from Xanadu? Or?
So, I mean, Michael Jackson, very energetic, very lively, right? I would have said he's more in a kind of something that's a bit racy and something that's a bit, it's got to be a bit fun and a bit kind of exciting. So I'd see Cabernet, like that kind of Cabernet, as being a bit more serious, and for Michael Jackson I'd be thinking something, or he'd be more of a sort of I don't know.
He's a condenser though. He maybe want to take a condenser. He's have a lot of energy.
Yeah, no,
and he's like a very have a different story in the industry.
Yeah, so I don't know, but maybe something that's in that kind of like lots of tightness and energy, like a really racy style of Chardonnay, like with lots of high acidity and lots of finesse and lots of energy.
I think that's what's going well with him. Let's talk about celebrities. Brad Pitt. Do you think Brad Pitt is gonna like any of which wine are you gonna suggest for him?
So Brad Pitt, a very accomplished actor, plays lots of different diverse roles, like molds to lots of different positions. To me, that's
very handsome as well.
Yeah, well, very handsome indeed. To me, that's kind of a Shiraz thing, right? Because Shiraz, you can grow it in a cooler place, you can grow it in a warmer place, you can grow it in lots of different climates and have lots of different. It has lots of different faces, and it always looks good no matter what it's doing.
Yeah,
right?
That's good. So. Yeah. Shiraz for him. Any particular Shiraz you want to recommend?
Oh, Lange Shiraz. We'll go with Lange Shiraz.
Like Shiraz, awesome. And what about Angelina Jolie? Just to make sure Angelina Jolie actually have a winery, yeah?
Yeah, I believe she does. But again, you've got a very...
You can't go to the rosé for her because she already have her rosé, so recommend something else.
So Angelina Jolie, certainly something that's very complex and interesting, and something a bit obviously feminine. So I'd probably go with a Pinot Noir for Angelina Jolie. I think it's lots of depth of character and lots of charisma, but still elegant and fine.
What's about the Queen?
Oh, the Queen, old-fashioned and very staid and sort of rich. I think would the Queen be more of a dessert wine kind of person, like a kind of cane cart, maybe a fortified, something kind of Rather Glen, Topac, something, good muscat, something like that.
Yeah, so probably like that. And what's about Donald Trump?
Donald Trump. Does Donald Trump even have a wine? Is there a wine bad enough to go with Donald Trump? It's going to be mass-produced, high-volume, simply made.
Very commercial.
Very commercial, exactly.
Let's go with some actually sport people. Maradona.
Maradona, again, clearly South American, right? So clearly he's going to be in that maybe Argentinian Malbec kind of space, I think, right? That's my impression of him.
Yeah, probably gonna put Argentine wines. And then the last one, Pablo Picasso. What do you recommend for him? It needs to be something like with art, I guess.
Yeah, certainly. Obviously artistic. Obviously, a lot of passion and a lot of depth, and something that's a bit crazy and mixed up as well. So, I think maybe, at Xanadu, we've only made a few of them, but we've worked with a Spanish variety called Graciano, and we've made a few Gracianos that are really interesting and engaging, but quite different from anything else that we make, just because it's such an unusual variety. So I think of all the wines we make, Pablo Picasso is probably in the Graciano position. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for the interview today. It was amazing. You give a lot of good insights about the brands you actually working and in different places. It was amazing. Did you like the interview?
Yes, it's been fantastic. Great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So tell a little bit about like the website and the cellar door, so people actually listening to this podcast, so how they actually can contact you guys or get to know more about you.
Absolutely. So all the information on Yering Station is available at yeringstation.com or yering.com. Yering.com, and we also have a website for Mount Lange-Garran, lange.com, and xanadudwines.com for our Xanadu products. We've got cellar doors at all three of our wineries, and we've got a restaurant at Yering Station and a restaurant at Xanadu, which are open for lunch, and then we do functions, weddings, events, parties, that kind of stuff at both properties. You'll track us down on social media quite easily, hopefully. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook and all those kind of places.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for today, and then please thank you, and then have a lovely day, Darren.
Thanks, Priscilla. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack Australia. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.